The wind didn't just blow, it screamed. It clawed at the walls of her small cabin like a starved beast, desperate to get in. Hazel Quinn felt the scream in her bones. She held onto the door frame, one hand up to shield her face from the blinding snow that ripped through the forest. Every breath she took was a sharp, white puff in the freezing air. The cold was a physical thing, a deep ache that settled into her fingers, making the old burn scar on her forearm throb with a phantom fire. This storm was a killer. It had come out of nowhere, a furious blizzard meant to bury the world and keep it buried. She should have been inside, huddled by the fire. But the latch on the goat pen had come loose, rattling in the wind, a sound that promised death. She couldn't lose her animals, not this deep into winter, not out here, where her only neighbors were the silent judging pines. The wind shifted, and a sound cut through its howl. Hazel froze. Through the stinging curtain of white, she saw it. A shape. A dark lump against the snow, just past the frozen creek. It was too still to be a deer, too solid to be a shadow. Her stomach twisted into a knot of ice. For a terrifying second, she thought it was a man, just standing there, watching her from the storm. But it didn't move. It was just a heap in the snow, half buried, unmoving. A body. Her mind screamed at her. A memory surfaced, cold and sharp as an icicle. Her father's voice, a gravelly whisper from a life she tried to forget. If it moves, it's a threat. If it bleeds, stay away. She took a step back, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. This had to be a trap. Someone left it there. A lure to draw her out of her tiny fortress. Her fingers brushed against the cold steel of the Winchester rifle that hung by the door. She hadn't fired it in months, not since a bear had wandered too close in the spring. But another voice, her own, whispered back, "What if they're hurt? What if they're dying?" Hazel gritted her teeth. "Not your fight," she muttered to the wind. But the image was seared into her mind. A person, alone, swallowed by the storm. And then she noticed something that made the blood freeze in her veins. There were no tracks, no footprints leading to the body, no hoofprints from a horse. It was as if the person had simply fallen from the sky, dropped into the snow like a piece of trash. She couldn't just turn her back on that. She couldn't. With a curse, Hazel pulled on her thickest coat, wrapped a scarf over her mouth and nose, and grabbed a flask of brandy and a coil of rope. She left the rifle where it was. If this was a trap, bringing a gun would only make her use it. The snow was a vicious, hungry thing, knee-deep and fighting her every step. It stole her breath and burned her lungs. When she finally reached the figure, she fell to her knees, gasping. It was a native man, judging by his tunic and the dark braids escaping from under his collar. He looked young, maybe not even 30. His clothes were soaked through with blood, frozen into black, brittle patches. His leg was bent at an angle that defied nature, a sliver of bone jutting out from the torn leather of his trousers, stark white against the dark fabric. His face was all sharp angles and high cheekbones, slack with cold, but even near death, he was beautiful. With trembling fingers, she pulled off a glove and pressed them against his neck. She waited. A beat. Another. And then she felt it. A faint, fluttering pulse, a ghost of a heartbeat. Relief washed over her so intensely it made her dizzy, and she immediately hated herself for it. This was a mistake. She should leave him. Bringing a native man back to her cabin, that was asking for trouble. After the recent skirmishes near Fort Thomas, any settler caught helping an Indian would be branded a traitor, or worse. Questions would be asked, accusations would be made. He groaned, a low, guttural sound that was almost swallowed by the wind. His hand twitched, a feeble, useless movement. His eyes fluttered open for a split second, dark and wild and lost. Hazel held her hands up, showing they were empty. "I'm not going to hurt you," she yelled over the storm. "I want to help!" He didn't respond. He just sank back into unconsciousness. She didn't think. She acted. She looped the rope under his arms wrapped the other end around her own waist, braced her feet, and pulled. It was hell. Every step was a battle against the snow, the wind, and the dead weight of the man. Her boots slipped, her muscles screamed, and her lungs felt like they were on fire. The man's body left a dark, crimson smear on the pristine white snow, a trail of his life bleeding out behind them. It took her what felt like an eternity, a grueling 30 minutes that stretched into a lifetime, to drag him back to the cabin. She collapsed through the door, pulling him over the threshold just as a gust of wind slammed it shut behind them. The sound was like a gunshot, final and absolute. She lay there on the floorboards, chest heaving, soaked in sweat and melting snow. The stranger was a crumpled heap beside her, still, silent, bleeding. The air in her small cabin, usually filled with the comforting smells of pine smoke and wool, was now thick with the metallic tang of blood. Hazel closed her eyes, took one long, shuddering breath, and then forced herself to her feet. She bolted the door. She stoked the fire until it roared back to life. Then she lit the oil lamp, casting flickering shadows across the room. And then she began to work. She cut away his blood-soaked tunic with her sharpest knife, her hands moving with a steady precision that surprised even her. She cleaned the wound on his chest with boiled water and old linen rags. It was a bullet hole, deep, angry, and raw, but it wasn't bubbling, which meant his lung was probably intact. Thank God for small mercies. His broken leg was another story. She remembered that sound, the wet crack of a bone snapping. It was a sound you never forgot. She found 2 sturdy pieces of firewood and began tearing strips from an old blanket to make a splint. Her mind raced, a frantic whirl of questions. Who was he? Who had shot him? And the most haunting question of all, why were there no tracks? The storm outside was just getting started, but the storm she had just dragged inside her home? It had already begun. By the time Hazel finished setting and splinting his leg, the fire had settled into a low, steady glow. Her entire body ached with a fatigue so deep it felt like it had seeped into her bones. But her hands, they had moved on pure instinct, a quiet, forgotten muscle memory. She had cleaned and bandaged his wounds as best she could, leaving a grim pile of blood-stained rags in a basin by the stove. The man hadn't moved. He hadn't made a sound since she'd dragged him inside. She had placed him on her own cot, tucked him under her warmest woolen quilts. His skin was pale under its natural dark tone. His lips were chapped and blue. Hazel sat on a wooden stool, watching the way the firelight played across his strong jawline. He was a stranger, a danger, and yet she had saved him. What had he been doing out there in a blizzard, shot and left for dead? Her eyes fell on the small leather pouch she'd found tucked inside his coat. She hadn't been looking for it, but when she was cutting away his tunic, it had fallen out. Now it sat on the table beside her, calling to her. Her fingers hesitated for only a moment before she gave in to the curiosity. She untied the leather cord and tipped the contents onto the table. 3 things. A small, folded square of what looked like tanned deerskin, covered in intricate symbols she didn't recognize. 3 jagged, glittering pieces of a dark, obsidian-like stone, and a small, torn scrap of paper. It was a crude drawing, a map. It showed a forked creek, a high ridge, and a single bold X marked near the top. Her mouth went dry. Gold. She'd seen maps like this before, years ago during the last gold rush. Men had flooded these mountains, driven by whispers of veins of gold so rich they were said to be cursed. Most of those men ended up as ghosts, swallowed by the wilderness or by their own greed. And now here was this man, a native, with a piece of a prospector's map in his pocket, bleeding out in her bed. Was he protecting this place? Or was he one of them? Had he been betrayed by his partners? She looked back at him, lying so still on the cot. In the flickering firelight, his brow furrowed. His head twitched, as if he were fighting something in a dream. His lips parted, and a single word, hoarse and cracked, broke the silence of the room. 4. Hazel leaned closer, her heart starting to pound. His eyes fluttered open. They were glassy, unfocused, staring at something only he could see. He whispered again, a little stronger this time. 4. Not soldiers. Creek. And then he was gone again, slipping back into the deep well of unconsciousness. Hazel sat there, frozen. Not soldiers. That ruled out the army patrols that sometimes rode through the territory. 4. 4 what? 4 men. The ones who shot him. The ones who wanted this map. She quickly gathered the map, the stones, and the deerskin, and shoved the pouch under a loose floorboard beneath her bed. If someone came looking for him, for this, she didn't want it lying out in the open. She went back to his side. He was sweating now, a fever taking hold. His lips moved, but no more words came out. Hazel soaked a cloth in cool water and gently wiped his forehead. "You're safe now," she whispered, though the words felt like a lie. Whoever they were, they're gone. But she didn't believe it. You don't shoot a man in the back and leave him for dead unless you're sure he's going to die. And if they found out he hadn't, they would be back to finish the job. Outside, the wind howled louder, as if it knew a terrible secret, as if it was telling her that saving this man hadn't ended the danger. It had just invited it into her home. The next morning, the world was silent, wrapped in a thick blanket of fresh snow. The storm had broken. Hazel moved through her morning chores on autopilot, her mind 1,000 miles away. She checked the stove, melted snow for water, fed the shivering goats. Inside, the man was still sleeping, but his breathing was deeper, more even. His color was better. A small flicker of pride went through her. She had done that. She had pulled him back from the brink. She came back inside with an armload of firewood and found him staring at her. His eyes were clear now and sharp. He didn't speak, just watched her as she carefully stacked the logs by the hearth. "You're awake," she said, her voice sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet cabin. He blinked once. His gaze moved from her face to her hands, then around the small room, taking everything in. Slowly, painfully, he tried to sit up. "Easy," she said, moving to his side. "You've got a broken leg and a bullet in you. You move too fast, you'll tear those stitches right open." His lips parted, and he spoke for the first time, his voice a dry rasp. "Where?" "My cabin, near Bitterroot Pass." She hesitated. "I found you in the snow. You were almost frozen." His jaw tightened. "You carried me." "I dragged you," she corrected. "I'm not that strong." A long, heavy silence settled between them. Then he spoke again, his voice low. "You could have left me." Hazel just shrugged. Didn't. He studied her for another long moment, his dark eyes searching hers, as if trying to read a story written there. Finally, he gave a single slow nod. She went to the stove and ladled some warm broth into a mug. "Can you hold this?" she asked. He reached for it, his hand trembling slightly. She helped him steady the cup as he took a few slow sips. After a moment, he looked up at her. "Hazel." She was startled. "That's my name. How—" "I heard you. In the storm." Another silence. She felt like she should say something, fill the quiet, but she didn't know what. Finally, she asked, "What's your name?" He hesitated, as if weighing the cost of the words, as if trust was a currency he couldn't afford to spend. At last he said, "Atohi." "Atohi," she repeated. The name felt solid, grounded. It suited him. He leaned his head back against the wall, exhausted by the short exchange. "I have to go," he murmured. "Not like this you don't," Hazel said firmly. "You wouldn't make it a mile." His jaw clenched, a muscle twitching in his cheek. "They'll come." Hazel felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold outside. Who? Who will come? Atohi's eyes locked onto hers, and they were filled with a certainty that terrified her. "The ones who left me," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "They'll come looking for what I took, and when they find me here, they will kill us both." The days that followed were wrapped in a thick, tense silence. The snow outside muffled the world, but inside the cabin, The quiet was heavy with unspoken questions and the constant thrumming threat of discovery. Hazel went about her chores, but her ears were always straining, listening for the snap of a twig, the crunch of a boot in the snow, the one sound that would mean their time had run out. Atohi was healing. Slowly, stubbornly, he was knitting himself back together. He rarely spoke, but his presence was a solid, grounding force in the small cabin. He watched her constantly, his eyes filled with a quiet curiosity. One morning, as she was changing the dressing on his shoulder, she broke the silence. "You don't talk much." He looked at her for a long moment before answering. "Talking is how most people get things wrong." A small smile touched her lips. "Is that why you haven't asked me anything about myself?" "I already know what matters," he said simply. She raised an eyebrow. "Oh, you do?" "You didn't let me die," he said. He paused, his gaze dropping to her left arm, which she kept habitually covered. "You hide your hand, but not your heart." Hazel froze. She instinctively pulled her sleeve down further, covering the scarred skin beneath. An old, painful habit. He didn't press. He never did. He just took the cup of pine needle tea she offered and turned his gaze back to the fire. Later that day, she went out to check her snares by the creek. "I'll be back before dark," she told him. "Don't you dare try to move." He gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod. The cold air was sharp and clean, and the sun on the snow was dazzling. For a moment, she almost felt normal again. 2 of her snares were empty, but the third held a rabbit. It was thin, but it was food. As she knelt to untie it, she saw them. Boot prints. They were fresh, and they weren't hers. 4 sets of them. They came from the direction of the ridge, the same ridge from Atohi's map, and disappeared into the trees. Someone had been here. Very recently. She grabbed the rabbit and hurried back to the cabin, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. When she burst through the door, Atohi looked up from where he was sharpening a small knife. He saw the look on her face and immediately tensed. "What is it?" "Someone's been by the creek," she said, bolting the door behind her. "Boot prints. 4 of them." His jaw tightened. "Them." It wasn't a question. "That's what you said," she whispered. 4. He finally told her the whole story. He was a guardian of his tribe's ancestral lands. He had found the men prospecting illegally on sacred ground. "I tried to talk to them," he said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "I told them the land was not to be disturbed. I told them it was a burial ground. They laughed at me." He stared into the fire, but he was seeing something else. Then one of them pulled a rifle. "You tried to reason with them?" Hazel asked, shocked. "I am a peace walker," he said simply. "It is my duty." The term jolted a memory loose. "My mother, she used to talk about the tribes, before the drink took her. She said peace walkers were the bravest warriors, because their battle was for understanding, not for blood." Atohi looked at her, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. "Most white people think our silence is weakness. They only hear what they want to hear." He looked down at his splinted leg. "They shot me as I turned to leave. I took the map from their table as I fell. It wasn't about gold, Hazel, not really. It's about what's under the gold, a massive vein of copper, the kind the government would kill for." Hazel's blood ran cold. This was so much bigger than a few greedy prospectors. "They don't know you survived," Atohi continued. "They'll think the land is unguarded now. They'll be back, and if they find me here, they'll kill you," she finished for him. He met her eyes, his gaze steady and dark. "And you." Hazel took a deep, shaky breath. "Then we have to be ready." That night, she took the pouch out from under the floorboards and spread the contents on the table. The deerskin cloth, the strange, glittering stones, the torn piece of map. "They were missing this part," Atohi said, pointing to the sketch. "It shows the entrance to the sacred caves. It's the key. Without it, they're just digging blind." "If they get this," Hazel whispered, They'll bring more than just rifles next time. They'll bring an army, Atohi said. They'll call it progress. She carefully packed the pouch and put it back in its hiding place. Atohi watched her, his expression unreadable. You trust me with it? He asked. I don't trust anyone, she said, her voice harder than she intended. But I trust that this land deserves better than men like them. He studied her for a long time, as if he was seeing her for the first time. You speak like someone who knows betrayal. Hazel didn't answer. She just turned back to the stove, her silence a confession. That night, she woke to find him at the window, a dark silhouette against the moonlit snow. He was watching the trees, waiting. He wasn't afraid. He was like a man who could feel the storm coming long before the clouds gathered, and had decided this time he wasn't going to run. The sound came just before dawn, a low, distant boom that rattled the single pane of glass in the window. It wasn't thunder. It was the sound of dynamite. Hazel was out of bed in an instant, her heart pounding. Atohi was already at the door, peering through a crack in the wood. They've started, he said, his voice grim. They said they'd wait till morning, Hazel whispered, pulling on her boots. Men like that don't keep promises. He turned to her, his face set like stone. They're blasting the ridge. If they collapse the entrance to the caves, they'll block the underground spring. The water that feeds our valley will turn to poison. This was it, the moment she had been dreading. Your tribe, she said, her voice shaking slightly. If they see this, if they think you're dead. It will be war, he finished. My father. He has held the young warriors back for years, preaching peace. An attack on a sacred site will be the spark that burns the whole forest down. Then we have to stop them. She grabbed her coat. I have to go, warn someone, get help. No, Atohi said, grabbing her arm. His grip was surprisingly strong. It's too late for that. There's only one path now. His eyes were blazing with a fierce, desperate light. You have to lead them away. What? How? The map, he said, his gaze intense. You take the decoy we made. You run. You make them see you. Make them chase you. Lead them south, away from the caves, away from the path to my village. That's suicide, she hissed. They'll catch me. They'll kill me. No, he said, his voice softening just a fraction. They won't kill you right away. You're a white woman. You're leverage. They'll want to know who you're working with. It will buy us time. Buy us time. What are you going to do? I'm going to the caves, he said. The old way. There's a hidden path, one they don't know about. I can get there before they do more damage. I can stop them. You can barely walk, she protested, gesturing to his splinted leg. I will crawl if I have to, he said, his jaw set. This is my burden to carry, but I need you to be my shield, Hazel, just for a few hours. He reached out and his fingers brushed her cheek. I am asking you to trust me. She looked into his eyes, and she saw the truth there. This wasn't a choice. It was the only way. She gave a short, sharp nod. All right. She stuffed the decoy map into a satchel. As she was about to leave, he stopped her. He pressed a small, smooth stone into her hand. It was one of the glittering black stones from his pouch. For courage, he whispered. She closed her hand around it, the stone surprisingly warm against her skin. Then she was out the door, running. She didn't look back. She crashed through the trees, making as much noise as she could, snapping branches, leaving a trail a blind man could follow. She ran south, just as he'd told her, her lungs burning, her legs screaming in protest. It didn't take long. She heard them behind her. The thunder of hooves, the angry shouts of men. There she is! Get her! It was Bickner's voice, the man from her nightmares, the one she'd seen in town with his cruel eyes and mocking smile. She pushed herself harder, scrambling up a rocky outcrop. She glanced back and saw them. 4 riders fanned out, closing in on her. There was nowhere to go. She was trapped. Bickner was in the lead, a savage grin on his face. He was enjoying this. He reined in his horse just a few feet away from her, his rifle aimed squarely at her chest. Well, well, look what we have here. the little stray from the cabin. The other 3 men circled her, their faces hard and merciless. Hazel's heart was a frantic drum against her ribs. She was out of breath, cornered, and terrified. "Give us the map, girl," Bickner snarled. Hazel clutched her satchel. "I don't know what you're talking about." He laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Don't play dumb. We know the Indian was with you. We saw his tracks leading from your cabin. Where is he?" "He's gone," she lied, her voice trembling. Bickner dismounted, walking slowly toward her. He was a big man, and he smelled of sweat and stale whiskey. He reached out and grabbed her satchel, ripping it from her shoulder. He pulled out the decoy map and glanced at it, then tossed it aside. "This is junk. Where's the real one?" "I told you I don't have it." His eyes narrowed. He took a step closer, his face just inches from hers. "Maybe you need a little persuasion." He reached out and grabbed the front of her coat, his knuckles brushing against her neck. His gaze dropped to her wrist, where her sleeve had ridden up, exposing the edge of her scar. He smirked. "Looks like someone's already tried to teach you a lesson or two." Tears of rage and fear pricked at her eyes. She wanted to scream, to fight, to claw his eyes out. But she was frozen. And then it happened. A sound like a hornet buzzing past her ear. An arrow slammed into the tree trunk right next to Bickner's head, its feathers quivering. Everyone froze. Bickner spun around, his eyes wide with shock. From the shadows of the trees, figures emerged, silent, deadly. Apache warriors, their faces painted for battle, their bows drawn taut. And at their head was a woman. She sat atop a black horse, her expression as hard and unforgiving as the mountains around them. Bickner swore, shoving Hazel in front of him, using her as a shield. He pressed the cold barrel of his rifle against her temple. "Stay back!" he screamed, "or the girl gets it!" The woman on the horse stared at him, her eyes filled with a cold fire. "Let her go, Bickner." Her voice was calm, but it carried an authority that sent a shiver down Hazel's spine. "Not a chance," Bickner spat. "Not until I get what I came for." And then from the top of the ridge behind them, a voice called out. A voice that made Hazel's heart stop. "Let her go, Bickner." It was Atohi. He stood there, leaning on a makeshift crutch, his face pale and strained, but his eyes were blazing. He was alone. "Well, well," Bickner sneered. "Look who decided to join the party. Came to watch your girlfriend die?" "Let her go," Atohi repeated, his voice ringing with a strength Hazel didn't know he possessed. "And I will give you what you want. The real map, the stones, everything." He held up the leather pouch. A trade, her life for the land's secrets. Bickner's eyes gleamed with greed. He licked his lips, his gaze flicking from Atohi to the warriors, to the woman on the horse, and then back to Hazel. The rifle barrel pressed harder against her head. The world seemed to hold its breath. Hazel closed her eyes, the cold stone still clutched in her hand. This was it. The moment where everything would break. "No deal," Bickner snarled, a cruel smile twisting his lips. He was enjoying this, holding all the power. "I think I'll take both, the map and her." The warrior woman Taver let out a sharp command in her native tongue. In perfect unison, a dozen arrows were aimed directly at Bickner's chest. He just laughed. "You shoot me, she dies with me." Hazel felt the cold steel of the rifle barrel against her temple. Her entire world had shrunk to that single point of contact. This was how it ended. But Atohi took a step forward, his weight on his good leg. "You want the map, Bickner? Come and get it." He tossed the leather pouch onto the snow-covered ground between them. It was a challenge, a gamble. Bickner's eyes darted to the pouch, his greed warring with his caution. That single moment of hesitation was all Hazel needed. She drove her elbow back hard into Bickner's gut. He grunted in surprise, his grip loosening for a fraction of a second. Hazel dropped to the ground, rolling away as a gunshot exploded above her head. All hell broke loose. Arrows flew through the air. Gunshots echoed off the canyon walls. It was chaos. One of Bickner's men screamed as an arrow found his shoulder. Another was dragged from his horse by two warriors who seemed to materialize out of the snow. Hazel scrambled behind a large boulder, her heart hammering against her ribs. She peered out just in time to see Tever leap from her horse, tackling the third man with a ferocity that was breathtaking. Bickner was firing wildly, backing away toward the trees. Atohi, using his crutch as a weapon, swung it with surprising force, knocking the rifle from Bickner's hand. The two men fell to the ground, a desperate, clumsy tangle of limbs. Bickner was bigger, stronger, but Atohi was fighting with the fury of a man defending everything he loved. He was fighting for his land, for his people, for her. Hazel didn't hesitate. She grabbed a heavy rock and ran toward the fight. Bickner had Atohi pinned, his hands around Atohi's throat. Atohi's face was turning purple. With a scream of pure rage, Hazel brought the rock down on the back of Bickner's head. He collapsed, unconscious. The fighting stopped as quickly as it had started. The three other men were captured, bound, and silent. Tever stood over Bickner's unconscious form, her chest heaving. She looked at Hazel, then at Atohi, who was gasping for air on the ground. There was a moment of tense silence. Then Tever knelt beside Atohi, her expression softening. "You are a fool, my cousin," she said, but her voice held a grudging respect. She looked up at Hazel, her eyes sharp and assessing. "You fought well." It wasn't a compliment. It was a statement of fact. Hazel could only nod, her body trembling with adrenaline. It was over. They had won. But when they turned back to where Bickner had fallen, he was gone. All that remained was a smear of blood on the snow and a trail of stumbling footprints leading off into the dense forest. He had escaped. The victory suddenly felt hollow, incomplete. The snake was wounded, but not dead. And a wounded snake is the most dangerous kind. The journey to the Apache camp was a blur. They traveled in a somber procession, the three captured men bound and walking, their faces a mixture of fear and sullen anger. Hazel rode a horse one of the warriors had given her, her mind still replaying the chaotic violence of the fight. Atohi rode beside Tever, his face grim. The threat of Bickner, a shadow lurking in the wilderness, hung over them all. The camp was nestled in a hidden valley, protected by towering pines. It was larger than Hazel had expected, a small, bustling village of hide tents and smoking fires. As they entered, people emerged to watch them, their faces unreadable. Hazel felt 100 pairs of eyes on her, and the old instinct to shrink, to hide, rose up in her. They were brought before an elder, a man with a face like a weathered map and eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of generations. His hair was streaked with silver and he carried himself with an unshakable dignity. This was Atohi's father. Atohi slid from his horse and stood before the man. "Father," he said, his voice filled with respect. The elder looked from his son to the captured men, and then his gaze settled on Hazel. It was a heavy, piercing gaze. "This is the woman?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. "She saved my life," Atohi said, "and she fought with us." The elder took a step closer, circling Hazel as if she were a strange animal. Tever stood silently by, her arms crossed, watching. The entire camp seemed to be holding its breath. "Why?" the elder asked, his voice sharp. "Why would a white woman risk her life for our land?" "It wasn't for the land," Hazel said, her voice quiet but steady. "It was for him." She nodded toward Atohi. The elder's eyes narrowed. "You are a spy," he said, the words hitting her like a slap. "Bickner sent you to earn our trust, to find our weaknesses." "No," Hazel protested. "That's not true. I have the real map, the stones. I hid them from him." She reached into her coat and pulled out the small leather pouch, holding it out as proof. The elder didn't even look at it. His gaze was fixed on her face, on her scar. "We know of you, Hazel Quinn," he said, his voice dropping low. "We know about the mark your mother left on you." Hazel froze, the blood draining from her face. How could he know that? It was a secret she had buried for years, a brand of shame she kept hidden from the world. A person marked by such violence can do one of two things. the elder continued, his voice echoing in the silent valley. They can either spend their life spreading that same pain, or they can learn to stop it. The question is, which one are you? It wasn't an accusation, it was a test. Her past, the thing she had run from her entire life, was now being laid bare before these people. And her future, her very life, might depend on her answer. Hazel stood there, the weight of every eye in the village pressing down on her. The elder's question hung in the air, sharp and heavy as a blade. Which one are you? For a moment, the old shame threatened to swallow her. The urge to hide, to run, was a physical thing, a clawing at the back of her throat. But then she looked at Atohi. He was watching her, his expression not of judgment, but of unwavering faith. He had trusted her when he had no reason to. He had seen past her scars to the person beneath. She took a deep breath, and the shame began to recede, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. I have spent my whole life running from what was done to me, she said, her voice ringing out in the quiet camp. She slowly, deliberately, pushed up the sleeve of her left arm, exposing the raw, jagged burn for everyone to see. I have hidden this, and I have hidden myself. But running doesn't heal anything. It just lets the pain follow you. She looked directly at the elder, her gaze unflinching. I am not that little girl anymore. I am not my mother's violence. I saw what Bickner and his men were doing, and I saw the same hate that created this. She touched her scar, and I decided I would not let it spread. Not here, not anymore. A murmur went through the crowd. The elder studied her, his dark eyes searching hers. A long, agonizing moment passed. Then he gave a slow, deliberate nod. You have spoken with a true heart, he said. He turned to his people. She is no spy. She is an ally. The tension in the camp broke like a fever. Taver, who had been watching with a stony expression, walked over to Hazel. My cousin was right to trust you, she said. She looked from Hazel to Atohi, and a sad, knowing smile touched her lips. I see now that his path has diverged from the one we planned. She placed a hand on Atohi's shoulder. Be happy, cousin. It was a release, a blessing. In the days that followed, Hazel found something she never thought she would have again, a home. She worked alongside the Apache women, helping to tend the wounded, sharing her knowledge of healing herbs. She taught the children games her own mother had taught her, before the darkness had taken hold. She slowly, piece by piece, began to weave herself into the fabric of the tribe. She wasn't one of them, not by blood, but she was one of them in spirit. But the shadow of Bickner still lingered. One evening, as they sat around the communal fire, a scout rode into camp, his horse lathered in sweat. Bickner, he gasped. He made it to Fort Redstone. He's telling the soldiers that we attacked him, that we massacred his men. He's trying to start a war. A cold dread filled the camp. Bickner wasn't just a greedy man, he was a poison, and he was about to poison the army against them. We have to stop him, Atohi said, rising to his feet. We have to get to the fort and tell the commander the truth before it's too late. We will ride with you, Tever said, her hand on the hilt of her knife. Atohi looked at Hazel. This is not your fight anymore, Hazel. You can stay here. You will be safe. Hazel looked at the fire, at the faces of the people who had accepted her, at the man who had shown her that her scars did not define her. You once told me I didn't have to run anymore, she said, meeting his gaze. You were right. She stood up, her shoulders back, her head held high. Bickner started this with me and you. It's only right that we end it together. The race to Fort Redstone was a desperate, frantic ride. They pushed their horses to their limits, the wind whipping at their faces. When they finally saw the wooden walls of the fort in the distance, they also saw a column of blue-coated soldiers riding out, led by none other than Bickner himself. They were too late, or so it seemed. We have to stop them, Hazel yelled over the thundering hooves. Atohi spurred his horse forward, Taver and Hazel right behind him. They rode straight for the column of soldiers, a tiny, defiant force against a wave of steel. The commander, a gray-haired man with a stern face, held up a hand, and the column halted. Bickner's face turned into a mask of rage when he saw them. "Commander, these are the savages I told you about," he roared. "Arrest them!" "Let them speak," the commander said, his eyes on Atohi. Atohi, sitting tall on his horse, told the story. He spoke of the sacred land, of Bickner's illegal mining, of the attack, of the map. He spoke with a quiet dignity that was more powerful than any lie. Then, Hazel stepped forward. She held out the real map, the deerskin cloth, and the glittering stones. She showed the commander her scar. "This is the mark of men like Bickner," she said, her voice clear and strong. "Men who believe they can take whatever they want and destroy anyone who stands in their way. But he is wrong." The commander looked from the evidence in her hands, to Bickner's sputtering protests, to the calm, steady faces of Atohi and Tever. He was a man who had seen his share of liars and thieves on the frontier. He knew the look of true conviction when he saw it. "Mr. Bickner," the commander said, his voice cold as ice, "you are under arrest for inciting violence and giving a false report to the United States Army." Bickner's face went white. As two soldiers grabbed his arms, he looked at Hazel, his eyes filled with a venomous hatred. "This isn't over," he hissed. "My employers will not forget this." But his threats were empty now. Justice, swift and sure, had finally caught up with him. The treaty protecting the Apache lands was signed the next day. The land was safe. Weeks later, Hazel stood on the porch of her small cabin. The air was warm with the promise of spring. Atohi came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. They stood there for a long time, watching the sun set over the mountains they had fought for, the mountains that had brought them together. "What now?" she asked softly. "Now," he said, his lips brushing against her hair. "We build." He was right. They had a future to build, a life, together. The scars of the past would always be there, a reminder of the battles they had endured. But they were no longer wounds. They were proof of their survival, proof that even in the harshest winter, after the most violent storm, new life could and would begin. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more tales from the edge of the wild. And let me know in the comments below, what do you think happened to Bickner's powerful employers?